This right here is the legendary Xpro1, which was Fujifilm's first ever APS-C X-mount camera and featured the first ever X-trans sensor, which was revolutionary for image quality and color science at the time it was released in 2012. The build and the aesthetic design appealed to many photographers, as this was their entry point into a camera that looked, felt, and operated similar to a Leica camera at a quarter of the price. Over the last decade, Fujifilm has refined their brand identity to really appeal to photographers with their innovative designs. But recently, with buggy firmware updates, no word of an X-Pro4, and the release of a little toy-like camera marketed for content creators, it's starting to feel like they're forgetting or neglecting their core audience of us photographers. So I recently brought the Xpro1 to experience Fujifilm's original photography vision, and here are my thoughts. So I actually got this Xpro1 for a bit of a steal while scrolling on eBay. This camera was an old shop display model, so it's basically never been used. And there were three main reasons why I brought this camera. First, I wanted to test the theory I keep seeing online, people saying that the original X-trans sensor has the best color science Fujifilm has ever produced. Secondly, I just needed a fun little street photography camera for when I head over to Mexico and back to Brazil later this year, as I really don't want to be carrying around anything that's too expensive. And finally, I really wanted to experience what it's like to shoot with an X-Pro camera, as I've only heard fantastic and positive things about these cameras. Now, I will admit, in terms of image quality, I'm actually pleasantly surprised by how much detail, sharpness, and color fidelity you get out of this little 16 megapixel sensor. If you've been watching the channel for a while, you'll know that I did spend some time traveling around Brazil using the Fujifilm X-A5, which has a 24 megapixel Bayer CMOS sensor. So not an X-trans sensor, and I never really loved the files coming out of that camera. They were tough to grade, the images weren't that sharp, and overall it just left me feeling a little underwhelmed. But after briefly using the Xpro1, it's clear this camera is a much better option because of that original X-trans 1 sensor. I do shoot RAW, and the files from the Xpro1 just grade fantastic in Lightroom. There is plenty of dynamic range if you over or underexpose your image, and for a little 12 megapixel APS-C sensor, the images are pretty sharp. If you do like the way that I edit my photos to get this nostalgic pastel film look, go check out the link in the description down below to pick up a preset pack for yourself. These work across all major camera brands, and if you sign up to my newsletter, you'll receive 20% off your first order. So no sponsor this week. If you want to support me, go check out my presets. And I picked up this Xpro1 for around $840 Australian, which works out to be around 550 USD. And honestly, my first impressions are great. The simplicity of this camera really adds to the enjoyment, which I really missed about Fujifilm cameras. I love that these X-Pro cameras have this hybrid viewfinder, meaning that you have the option to switch between an optical and an electronic viewfinder, which is just such a fun experience and gives you that classic rangefinder feel at a fraction of the price. And something I didn't expect when using the optical viewfinder is that the framing doesn't 100% line up with your shot, which actually makes it more interesting to shoot with, as you have this feeling of the unknown, giving a more traditional raw photography approach. And when using the OVF, you can see subjects entering or leaving the frame. So I think that all the design choices Fujifilm made in the X-Pro line really just makes sense for photography. That's why it's so hard to understand why they've just neglected this series of cameras, as it's been 6 years at the time of recording this video since the Xpro3 was released. Fujifilm actually officially discontinued the Xpro3 production in 2023. Now, even though this Xpro1 is 12 years old, it's definitely not perfect, and here are some quirks that I've found so far. The autofocus works just fine in single shot, pretty much like every other older Fujifilm camera, and in manual focus it does have nice hyperfocal focal distance markings, perfect for zone focusing. Another quirk I found about this camera, and it actually applies to all Xpro1 models, is that this rear command dial tends to fail over time. Like I mentioned, this was a shop demo and has barely been used, but even so, the back dial doesn't work at all. That means I can't change key settings like my aperture unless I'm using lenses with a dedicated aperture ring instead. So unfortunately, these fantastic Viltrox Air Series lenses just don't work properly on this camera, which is a bit frustrating. Another thing worth noting is that the screen it's pretty bad. So when I first reviewed the raw files, most of them were underexposed. So I actually decided to go for a more analog, simple approach with this camera. And I just used the OVF and set the exposure comp to +3 or +7, which works great. And I can just fix the exposure in Lightroom, no problem. And that's another reason why I personally like to shoot raw. Also, since this camera is from 2012, the video quality is subpar, but honestly, that's a plus in my book, as this camera is a photography first camera through and through. Which brings me on to a bit of a disappointing rant about Fujifilm. I personally really feel like Fujifilm has shifted away from photographers and towards content creators. And honestly, their pricing structures just got a little bit unfair. Take the controversial X-Half, for example. Now, I actually do like this camera because it's innovative, and that is just very Fujifilm. And if this is your first camera and gets you into photography, that's great. It also looks like a fun, cute camera to use. But for photography, it can't shoot raw, there's no hot shoe, and the built-in flash, well, it's not a flash, it's just a selfie LED light, which is a little bit upsetting because they put a fantastic leaf shutter, which is great for flash photography, as you can shoot at any shutter speed. They did market this camera as half the size, twice the fun, but let's be real guys, it's more like half the size, twice the price. After taxes and shipping, it comes to around $850 USD retail, and for that, you could buy a much more capable camera like the XM5. Meanwhile, the X100 6 drops in limited batches, fueling the hype, and it's starting to feel like Fuji's adapting the luxury brand tactics by controlling supply and calling it manufacturing delays. Fujifilm's clearly focused on that GFX line for professional photographers, but for hobbyists or anyone who just wants a fun, well-designed camera, it feels like they've just lost the plot. And after using this fantastic Xpro1, I really just can't understand why Fujifilm has neglected this line of cameras, as I personally think they're the best model of camera they've ever made. If you are looking to pick one of these up, I highly recommend the Xpro1, especially if you want a fun, pure photography experience. But after doing some digging, I actually think the Xpro2 is a better buy if you've got the budget. It keeps that same shooting philosophy, but with faster autofocus, high resolution sensor, and better usability. As for the Xpro3, honestly, it's really expensive on the second-hand market, and at that price, I'd rather see them just make a proper Xpro4 already. Quick reminder guys, if you do like the way that I edit my photos to get this nostalgic pastel film look, go check out my presets, which are linked at the top of the description. If you guys want to see more videos about the Fujifilm X-T5, well, I've made a dedicated 1-year ownership video here, and also a more in-depth 3-month ownership video right here that you guys can watch now. Alright guys, enjoy your week and go out and take some photos.